Well, good afternoon. Thanks a lot for coming here. I know you're going to enjoy the presentation. A couple of disclaimers. We're firefighters. We're not public speakers. So if it goes a little slow, a little rough, you'll understand that. Secondly is we're not all that computer savvy. So we have Dave here, and I know at some point in time this might go down, and then we'll just have to wing it. Well, we're gonna start today with a tradition and a symbol in the fire service. The symbol is the bell, and the tradition is ringing that bell. The significance of the bell in the fire service is it started the day off back in the day. You got a call, they'd ring the bell. Call was over, they'd ring the bell. The main thing is if they ring that bell three times each, it signified the loss of a firefighter in line of duty. We can see, sorry if I get emotional, I see Jim over there, it makes me cry all the time. But anyway, in the history of the Kankakee Fire Department, it's 126-year history, we've had 2 line of duty deaths. All right, on December 17th, 1921, we lost firefighter Arthur Stiers. And then again, July 1st, 2010, we lost Lieutenant Frank Fouts. So we're gonna have a bell ceremony for them. Okay. The show today, we should have really done a video of getting this show together and putting this presentation on. Because in the offices and picking out the pictures and everything that we wanted to show was a movie in itself, and it was great. I'd like to thank Roberta. She called back in April and said, "You want to do this?" I said, "I got to make some phone calls first." You know, and so my first phone call was to the department historian, who I believe, Ronald Homberg, and asked if he'd do it, and I was thrilled when he said he would, because I've been trying to get him to do this for a long time, and finally, today's the day, so we're really happy about that. And also included Assistant Chief Guimo, who's the oldest retiree, longest retired member of the department, who started the Bureau, and that's a big aspect of our job, so he's going to go through that, and then 75 to 80% of our call volume is EMS. Come on in. Is EMS. So Tom McVeigh, Lieutenant Tom McVeigh retired, asked him if he'd give that, how he started it and how it worked out. You know, so those are the aspects that we're going to cover today. There's many more. I mean, Roberta, when we went through this, I said we could do a presentation on this, and this. All right, because I'm a firm believer that you don't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. All right, we're gonna go back all the way to 1853 today, and that's where we've been. You know, so it's. I hope that you enjoy the presentation. I want to thank Dave for meeting with the retirees to get the slideshow going, and Roberta and the Kankakee Historical Society, and for all of you for being here. So thank you. Let me have a little bio. If we want to go ahead and get Ron's presentation up there. It's going to take a few minutes just to get this ready. Here he is. Doesn't look much different today than he did then, did he? You know, retired Lieutenant Ron Homberg. You know, he's a second generation Kankakee Fire Department lieutenant. He is the son of the late Lieutenant Louis Homberg, who served the Kankakee Fire Department 2 different times, from 1933 to 1935, and then again in 1938 until his death in 1958. Ron was born and raised in the city of Kankakee. He attended Kankakee Public Schools and graduated from the high school, Kankakee High School, in 1953. He's been married for 57 years to Norma. Has 4 grown children, 13 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. He joined the fire department in 1966. He was promoted to lieutenant in 1973, and he retired in 1986 with 20 years of service. Ron's youngest son, Gary, who's with us today, has been a member of the Kankakee Fire Department for 23 years. He currently holds the rank of lieutenant, making him a third-generation Kankakee Fire Department lieutenant. Gary's oldest son, Chad, Ron's grandson, is a federal firefighter, and this makes 4 generations of firefighters in the Homberg family. I'd like to present Lieutenant Ron Homberg, retired.
Good afternoon. I was asked by Fire Chief Ron Young to come here this afternoon to assist in providing information regarding the history of the Kankakee Fire Department. Some of the information that I'm going to provide was obtained from old newspapers that have been microfilmed and are on file at the Kankakee Public Library and the Kankakee Community College Library. Some of the information is from books written about the history of Kankakee, and some of the information I witnessed personally. As I go along, if you have any questions, raise your hand and I'll try to answer it if I know the answer. To start with the history of the fire department, we need to go back to the beginning of the town. On February the 1st, 1852, the Illinois Central Railroad started laying track southward from Chicago. By July 11th, 1853, they reached the Kankakee River. There they were stopped, awaiting the completion of the railroad bridge across the river. Several towns began to emerge along the railroad tracks, one of them being Kankakee in 1853. People moved into the area and built houses and business establishments. Most of these were constructed of wood, so one of the greatest threats to the community was fire. On January 15, 1855, a town meeting was called by the citizens for the purpose of forming a volunteer bucket company. The meeting was held at the Kankakee Railroad Depot. Now, that's not the depot that's there today, but this first depot was on Station Street. The bucket company was approved. Leather fire buckets were purchased. They were painted red on the inside, black on the outside, with the initials of the fire company and the numeral 1 painted in white on the front and the back of the bucket. Within a matter of weeks, Excelsior Hook and Ladder Fire Company number 1 had been formed. Excelsior is defined as the best or the top of the line. The hooks carried by the Hook and Ladder Company were used to pull down burning outside walls. In 1878, the city purchased the old Methodist Church building on Dearborn Avenue. That would be the 100 blocks south Dearborn, about in the middle of the block. They purchased it to use as a city hall, a police department, and a firehouse. The old church bell, which was left with the building, was used to sound the alarm of fire. It would be rung a number of times to correspond with the number of the ward in which the fire was reported. The church used this building from 1854 to 1866. From 1866 to 1878, it was the Kankakee High School. And from 1878 to 1903, it was a city hall. And in 1905, the building was torn down. Residents had wells, and during the early 1880s, several large cisterns were installed in the alley in the business district. The cisterns would catch the rainwater for use by the bucket companies. In later years, during excavation, one cistern was discovered in the alley in the 100 block north between Schuyler Avenue and Dearborn Avenue, behind the Turk Furniture Building. A second cistern was discovered in the alley in the 100 block north between Schuyler Avenue and East Avenue while developing a parking lot. In 1886, Emery Cobb constructed a water pumping station very close to where the water pumping station is located today. Emery Cobb owned all that land south of River Street and east of Harrison Avenue, clear out into Sunnyside. So this water pumping plant was constructed on his land on what is called Cobb Boulevard today. 12 miles of water mains and 110 fire hydrants were installed. Bucket companies now became hose companies. Two-wheel hose carts carrying hose, nozzles, and other equipment and being pulled by two men were now in service. Now, in this particular picture, which was taken January 11th, 1962, Miss Meta Rule gave this fire cart to Fire Chief John Marquardt. She had purchased it about 12 years earlier for $2 from some unidentified man, and she was going to use the wheels off of it for a flower garden. So she had it in storage, but never got around to using it. So she gave it to the fire chief. He had the men clean it up, put some hose on it and some nozzles, and two of the men wearing red shirts and black helmets would pull this cart in the parades in the early 1960s. On Sunday, May the 1st, 1887, at approximately 2 p.m., the most disastrous fire to date struck the community. The fire was discovered in the Bocant Implement Company's wooden building in the 100 block of Southwest Avenue. It was a windy day, and the fire traveled north up West Avenue, where it jumped across Court Street. In those days, all the roofs had wooden shingles, and the shingles would be on fire and burning and fly through the air, and when they landed on another structure, it would catch on fire. The fire continued north on Northwest Avenue to Chestnut Street, where it turned east, jumping the railroad tracks and burning down the German Lutheran Church, which was located on the northeast corner of Chestnut Street and East Avenue. When the fire was finally extinguished, 22 structures had burned to the ground. When the day ended, Kankakee found its fire department inadequate. Had it not been for the help of the well-equipped and well-trained State Hospital Fire Department, the loss would have been far greater. The German Lutheran Church rebuilt in 1888, the St. Paul's Lutheran Church, on Merchant Street between Indiana Avenue and Dearborn Avenue, and it's still there today. On May 19, 1887, the City Council issued a call for the formation of 3 volunteer fire companies. The 3 companies with officers and a regular drill program would give the city trained men for handling most fires. The fire companies had been working independently with no one responsible for all companies. After the volunteer companies were formed, new uniforms arrived. The shirts were navy blue with white flannel trimming and a monogram KFD in white on the breast. The cap was square-top naval style of blue flannel with the numbers of the company in brass over the visor. On the 4th of July, 1887, the new Kankakee Fire Department took a prominent place in the parade. With its 3 hose carts and the hook and ladder company, and the mayor as acting chief of the fire department. On Monday, November 14th, 1887, Frank D. Hatch was appointed fire chief by Mayor F.D. Radke. Mr. Hatch, who was a local businessman and a captain on Hose Company Number 1, was the first person to hold the title of fire chief. Now all companies would work together under the direction of the fire chief. This was the beginning of the fire department as we know it today. Since the appointment of Frank D. Hatch as fire chief, there have been 20 men to hold the title up to the present time. 5 of those men held the position at 2 different times, and 2 men served as acting fire chief but never received a permanent appointment. During the following years, the 2-wheel hose carts were replaced with 4-wheel hose wagons and were pulled by horses. The city never owned any horses for pulling fire equipment and never kept any in the fire stations. The teams and drivers were leased from local livery barns. Baker's Livery Barn was located in the 100 block of North Schuyler, right near the Majestic Theater, which was the Remington Theater back in those days. They took care of the hose wagon for number 1 station and for the ladder company. Now, Baker had 2 horses that he used for the fire department, Sam and John. And when the alarm would ring at the fire department, it would ring at the livery stable. And that would release the electric latch on the stall doors. And the 2 horses would come out and take their positions underneath the suspended harness. Sam was a right-hand horse and John was a left-hand horse, and they never got mixed up. They always went to where they were supposed to be. Company number 2 leased their horses from Mose Paterni's livery stable, which was located at 355 West Merchant Street. Now, the 2-story house is still there today, but most all the ground has been converted into parking lot for the hospital. Mose Paterni had 2 sons, Harry Paterni, who served as fire chief at 2 different times, and Noah Paterni, who had spent 22 years as assistant chief off and on the fire department. Mose had 4 horses, 2 black ones that he rented out for funerals and for people taking buggy rides. And he had 2 white ones, Prince and Jim, who were the fire horses. And when the alarm would ring at the fire station, the alarm would ring at the livery stable. And the 2 white horses would start snorting and pawing the ground because they knew they were going. And Mose would hook them up and come around the corner to the number 2 station and hook up the hose wagon and take off for the fire. Now, company number 3, I don't know anything about their horses. They leased them at the Holmes Brothers livery, and that's where they kept their fire wagon. And that was at 154 West Water Street, which eventually became Offerman Transfer and Storage Company, and then became the Baker Machine Shop. Today, the building is still standing. I don't think anything's in it. It's got a sign on it for sale. In this picture up above here, it was taken in the 1890s, early 1890s, of the South Side Hose Company. And it lists all the men that were on the company. The captain was John McDonald. And of course, in the volunteer companies, the men elected their captains. Also, in 1890, the city council passed an ordinance authorizing the fire chief and the assistant fire chief to wear white helmets. The captains were to wear red, and the men would continue to wear the black. In 1899, Kankakee's first chemical cart was built by the Lewis Schneider and Son Wagon Shop, located at West Avenue and Merchant Street. The cart had a tank which held 60 gallons of the mixture of water, bicarbonate of soda, and sulfuric acid. The cost of the cart was $800. Well, you can't see the men too well standing in the doorway. The man in the center is Lewis Schneider. The man driving the horses is Arnold Baker from the livery stable. In 1903, the city rented the Foster Building at 240 East Merchant Street for a city hall. You can see it standing there. Off to the west of it is just plain open ground. That's where Alden's sat. It was on that corner, which included part of this building here. Originally, St. Paul's Episcopal Church had a wooden church sitting on that corner. And when they built their new church over at Station Street and Harrison Avenue, they sold the old one to the Central Christian Church. And they moved it to the 700 block of East Oak Street and used it up until 1914 when they built their brick church there. Now on this end was the police department. On that end you can see the two doors was the fire department, and the city hall was upstairs. When they moved there, they brought the fire bell with them from the Dearborn Avenue building. And it was mounted on the roof and a rope hung down inside. The police desk sergeant would ring the bell for fires. They were there from 1903 to 1917. In 1910, Mayor Henry Beckman established the paid fire department with the appointment of a chief and 3 men. The remainder of the department was still volunteer. During the next several years, Company number 1 and number 2 became paid, and the Southside Volunteer Company was disbanded. Also in 1910, Mayor Henry Beckman announced that the city had contracted for the building of an automobile fire truck for approximately $5,500. The new automobile fire truck was a 1911 Kissel chemical and hose wagon. The truck had 2 20-gallon chemical tanks located between the driver's seat and the hose bed. This truck was put on display at the 1911 Chicago Auto Show before it was delivered to Kankakee. There you can see it. That was taken around 1913. It was in front of the number 1 fire station at 240 East Merchant Street. In 1912, the city purchased a second automobile fire truck. They purchased a 1912 Kelly chassis and had the chemical tank and the wagon box from the horse-drawn chemical cart mounted on the chassis at a local carriage shop. Cost of the Kelly chassis, $2,350. In 1913, before there were any paved roads, the fire department received a call for help at a fire in the Peatone Business District. Company number 1 was loaded on a railroad flat car and taken by train to Peatone. Oh, wow. And of course, the Illinois Central Railroad had a big wooden loading and unloading platform on the south side of the Station Street on West Avenue. In fact, that's how some of these trucks arrived in Kankakee, was by boxcar. And the last one to arrive that way was in 1944. In 1917, the city rented the Potter Building at 263 East Merchant Street for a city hall, police department, and fire department. This building was across the street from the previous city hall building. And they stayed there from 1917 to 1928. And if you'll notice at the far end of the photograph, there's a house there, a 2-story house. Well, that's Dearborn Avenue and Merchant Street. That's where the Kankakee Daily Journal sits today. The police department was on this end, the fire department on the other end, and the city hall upstairs. In the back of the city hall was an apartment, which was rented by one of the firefighters, Arthur Stiers, and his wife. In 1917, the state passed a law requiring cities to provide a pension fund for police officers and firefighters. They were to receive half of their salary after 20 years of service, but they couldn't receive any less than $45 a month. In 1919, after the Kissel truck chassis gave out, the city purchased a 1918 truck from the Kankakee Motor Company, 860 North Greenwood Avenue, for $2,300. The chemical tanks and a portion of the hose box from the Kissel was mounted on the new truck, the Kankakee. And it had a plate across the front of the radiator that said Kankakee. The floorboards were made of wood, but in between the brake pedal and the clutch pedal, there was a black metal plate that said Kankakee on it. Now you can see it there. It's in front of the 263 East Merchant Street building, and the truck was white. When it come out, it was white. You're going to see it in other pictures, it isn't white anymore. Okay, 1920, the city purchased a 1919 American LaFrance 750 gallon per minute pumper. Cost of the pumper was $12,500. This was the first pumping engine for the department. And that's it in the front. That was number 1 truck. The white one was number 2 truck. And the third one was the 1912 Kelly Reserve truck. And this was taken in front of number 2 station. And you can see the old wooden building there. At 6:30 a.m. Saturday, December the 17th, 1921, firefighter Arthur A. Stiers of company number 1 was killed in the line of duty at a house fire at 128 North Greenwood Avenue. The fire was located in the basement, and didn't amount to too much, but there was a pile of kindling wood burning, which probably had been stored too close to the furnace, because in those days you either burnt coal or wood. Assistant Chief Noah Boturney was in the basement, and firefighter Stiers brought a 6-gallon chemical fire extinguisher around to the rear of the house, where he took the hose and pushed it through the basement window to the assistant chief. And the assistant chief told him to charge it, and he leaned over the extinguisher to activate the valve. And when he did, the extinguisher exploded. And it took off the top of his head from his eyebrows up and killed him instantly. So he was buried out in Mound Grove. Well, he was taken to Mound Grove Cemetery, and up here you can see the funeral procession that was held on Tuesday, December the 20th, 1921. The house in the background there, that's the old county jail on Court Street. The sheriff lived in the front, the jail part was in the back. You can see the old Baptist church just west of the county jail, and of course on this side of it would be the post office, and across the street from it would be the courthouse. It was proceeding east on Court Street, and he's on number 2 truck. The casket's on number 2 truck. That was the white truck. Now it's the red truck. So between January of 1921 and December of 1921, that truck got painted red. And there was a change of administration in May with a different fire chief, and I think that's probably when it was painted. The truck was covered with flowers, had black and white mourning cloth draped on it, and the pallbearers were on the truck. And I know it's pretty hard to see that up there right now. But the pallbearers, Assistant Chief Noah Boturney, he was driving the truck. Fire Chief Emil Goodrow was riding on the truck. And on this right running board was Harry Holtz, who was a driver at number 2 station. And standing there on the back of the truck was John Murphy. On the tailboard of the truck was Frank Hetherington, who was also a driver at number 1, and William Palzer, who was a driver at number 2. Also riding on the truck on the other side, but you can't see him, was Eli Odette and Lewis Rule. A squad of uniformed Kankakee police officers walked on each side of the truck as escorts. On this side of the truck, there was William Catlin, the far one at the end, who the following year became chief of police. There was Emery Rolfe, and up in front was Henry Andrews, who retired in 1935 from the department. On the other side of the truck in front was Ed Emming. He later became city detective. And standing next to him was Eli Abney. He was the father of one of our assistant chiefs, Gus Abney. And the third man over there, M.H. Williams. The truck proceeded down to Mound Grove Cemetery, where Stiers was put in the mausoleum there. That was the old mausoleum that used to be there. Well, through the years, the mausoleum deteriorated and they ran out of money, so they had to tear it down in 1969. So they removed all the bodies from the mausoleum. They provided graves, and they tried to contact the families to see if they wanted to purchase a headstone for the graves. Well, they couldn't find any family for Stiers. His wife had died 3 years after he died. So he was buried along the fence on Fair Street. The only thing was a number, with a piece of cement in the ground with a number on it that would indicate where he would be at. So December the 3rd, 1998, there was a memorial and a dedication service to dedicate a marker for his grave. This was led by Captain John Snyder. And there was a minister there, the mayor was there, and now the grave has this stone on it, which says Arthur A. Stiers, Kankakee firefighter, killed in the line of duty. And in 1922, the hours of firefighters were lowered due to a new state law. They will now work 24 hours on duty and 24 hours off duty. Under the old system, firefighters were required to be on duty 24 hours a day with 1 day off each week. They were also allowed at that time to go home for meals. But now that they're on this new system, they can't leave the fire station. Only the chief can leave the fire station. They hired 3 men when they went to this new system. 1 man replaced Arthur Stiers, and the other 2 men supplemented the 2 shifts. In fact, through the years, these 3 men were off and on the department, and eventually they all did retire on a pension. In 1923, Ben Alpiner was elected mayor. And of course, back in those days, the mayor ran on a 2-year term. And this was the 3rd time that he was elected mayor. Ben Alpiner was a Democrat, but he never ran on the Democrat ticket. Previously, he had been elected in 1911 on the independent ticket, and in 1915 on the law enforcement ticket. Now in 1923, he was elected on the People's Party ticket. And after taking office, one of his first official acts was to fire the entire police and fire departments. He had to make room for his political supporters. Well, 2 years later, in 1925, Louis E. Beckman was elected mayor. The political supporters hired under the previous administration were out of jobs. The men discharged in 1923 were given the opportunity to come back. Some did and some didn't. In 1928, the city purchased 3 Seagrave fire trucks. Now this one here will hold that picture for quite a while and talk about that. This one here was the 500 gallon per minute pumper. They purchased a 1,000 gallon per minute pumper, and they purchased a 75-foot aerial ladder. Now this truck here was the first to arrive, and it arrived on November the 8th, 1928. It was tested on November the 13th, 1928. And on Thursday, November the 15th, 1928, there was a major fire at the Gelino Brothers department store, which was located on the southeast corner of Court Street and Schuyler Avenue, where the Executive Center stands today. The only two pumpers they had was this new one and the old 750 gallon a minute American LaFrance. So the fire chief put in a call for help. He called Chicago Heights and he called Joliet. Chicago Heights sent one pumper and Joliet sent two. And if it hadn't have been for these additional pumpers, there'd been more buildings lost than just the department store. Now, Gelino's department store had two lions in front of it. Them are the lions that eventually went to the library. And Gelino's got them from Carson Perry Scott in Chicago when they did some remodeling. And in 1930, they sold them to the library for $25. And so when the library moved to where the Executive Center is, now the lions are in the back of the building, where before they were on Court Street. Now, in later years, we got another picture taken of this truck. And you may recognize a couple of the people that are on it.
I don't recognize them.
No. Now sitting there behind the steering wheel is the Kankakee Fire Department's administrative assistant, Gina Wood. And sitting next to her is the Kankakee Fire Department's retired administrative assistant, Roberta Renville.
I look good there.
Oh, well, okay. Go ahead, show the 1,000 gallon per minute pumper. Now this was taken in later years when this was number 2 truck. It was about the best picture I could find of it. And standing in the doorway is my father. Standing at the back of the truck is Captain John Marquardt and Lieutenant Roger Ringy. Both Marquardt and Ringy both eventually became fire chiefs. This was taken in front of the building at 385 East Oak Street, which was City Hall, #1 station, police station for years.
That's your dad back there? Mm-hmm. That's your dad?
Yeah.
Yeah, tell him.
I did.
Oh, I did?
Okay, the aerial truck was the last one to arrive. The aerial and this truck both arrived in December. Okay, now you can see a picture of the old 75-foot Seagrave aerial truck on the right and the new 1958 Seagrave aerial truck on the left. And the old truck had wooden ladders on it. The new truck had metal ladders on it. The new truck was 85-foot, had an 85-foot ladder. The old truck had a 75-foot ladder. The new truck could also pump, but the old truck, all it could do is it had ladders and it had the aerial ladder on it. This picture was taken at the time that they got rid of the old aerial truck. Now, what happened to all these old trucks that we had here? Well, the 1911 Kissel had a broken frame, and after removing the chemical tanks and the hose bit, it was junked in 1919. The 1912 Kelly was traded into the Seagrave Company in 1928 when the 3 Seagrave trucks were purchased. The city was allowed $800 for the Kelly. In 1918, bids were up. In the 1918, the bids were up in 1955 for the 1918 Kankakee truck. They only received 1 bid, so it was sold for $160 to Joseph Barzani, a local automobile dealer. 1919, American LaFrance was sent to Joe Gladd's junkyard on the Grinnell Road in 1948. The 1928 Seagrave aerial truck was traded into the Seagrave Company when the city purchased the 1958 aerial truck. The Seagrave Company sold the old truck to Boris Rule Towing and Automotive Service. Later on, Boris Rule sold the truck to the Kankakee Valley Park District. The Park District used it to repair lights and change bulbs in the lights on the ball diamonds. A few years ago, the Park District gave the old truck to the Kankakee Firefighters, Local 653. The truck is now in storage. The 1928 Seagrave 500-gallon per minute pumper was purchased in 1968 by Russell Johnson, who several years later became mayor. The truck is still operable and can be seen from time to time traveling down the streets. The 1928 Seagrave 1,000-gallon per minute pumper was placed on a cement slab in Birds Park in 1974 so the kids could play on it. In 1928, the city moved into the newly constructed building at 385 East Oak Street. The new building was a city hall, police department, and fire department. At 9:30 a.m. on Monday, November the 5th, 1928, the fire alarm bell rang at the building on Merchant Street. The fire department, the police department, and the city offices began their move to the new building. In 1928, a referendum vote was taken to place the police officers and the firefighters under civil service. Later years, this became known as Fire and Police Commission. This passed by 430 votes. In 1930, Fire Company Number 2 moved into their new station at 165 South Entrance Avenue. The old wood building had been torn down and a new brick building replaced it. In 1931, Captain Eli Odette was the first man to retire on pension from the fire department. Since 1931, there have been 105 men retired up to the present time. 53 of these men are deceased. 52 are receiving pensions, and 17 widows are receiving pensions. Now, Captain Odette joined the old volunteer company in June of 1888. And he worked there continuously under every administration up to 1923 when the mayor fired everybody. He had 35 years of experience at that time. And Eli Odette had 24 years on the volunteer department. And he'd been captain into the political system, and he was promoted to captain into the Police and Fire Commission. He came back in 1925 and worked 6.5 years. And in 1931, he had 17.5 years on the paid department, 24 years on the volunteer department. So the pension board gave him 2.5 years credit for those 24 years on the volunteer department. 1933, the newly elected administration apparently did not care about civil service. They discharged some men, kept some, hired new men. In 1935, the administration changed and 15 men were fired. These men brought lawsuits against the city. Only one man won and got his job back. The court ruled that the other men were illegally hired. In 1935, the pension fund was out of money. There were 5 persons receiving pensions. There was 1 retired firefighter, 1 fire department widow, 2 police department widows, and 1 retired police officer. And 4 months later, the retired firefighter passed away, so now there were 2 fire department widows, 2 police department widows, and 1 retired police officer. And their pensions amounted to a total of $279 a month. But the city didn't have any money. And they didn't resume any payments for 10 months. The 1 fire department widow hired an attorney. She was going to sue the city. And so 10 months later, they started paying the pensions again. And I never did find out if they ever got paid for them 10 months that they were out or not. In 1940, the firefighters organized Local 653, received a charter from the International Association of Firefighters. In 1944, the city received a 1945 American LaFrance 750-gallon-a-minute pumper. This truck was donated to the city by the Kankakee Chamber of Commerce. This was the first truck with a closed cab. All the previous trucks had been open cabs. This truck was made during World War II, so it didn't have any chrome on it. All rails, bars, connection, bumpers were painted. You can see it there in front of number 1 station, Armand Bouchard, the driver, standing alongside of it. Through the following years, the fire department continued to improve and update their equipment. The pumpers had a larger pumping capacity. The ladder trucks had longer aerial ladders. The emergency trucks, rescue trucks, and ambulances became more complex. In October 1945, the City Council passed an ordinance creating the position of engineer and assistant engineer on the fire department. Now, these were appointed positions. They didn't have anything to do with the Police and Fire Commission. The man appointed to the engineer's position had been on the department for 10 years. He was a mechanic, and he had been doing all the work on the trucks, the pumps, and the motors, and so forth. The man appointed assistant engineer had been off and on in the department and had a total of 9 years. And he was a body man by trade. He could pound out the dents and spray paint the trucks. These men held these positions until their retirement. One retired in 1958, one retired in 1959. And they never were replaced. In 1947, there were 4 retirements. One firefighter and 1 captain retired April the 15th. The assistant chief and another captain retired May the 1st. Now there was just the fire chief left. There were no lieutenants on the department. There had only been 2 captains, 1 for each shift. Now the only thing left was the fire chief, the engineer, and the assistant engineer. So for a month, up until June of 1947, that's the way they ran. At that time, the Police and Fire Commission promoted 6 first-class firefighters. 2 were promoted to captain, and 4 were promoted to lieutenant. Now each shift, there was only 2 at the time, each shift had 1 captain working at number 1 station, and 1 lieutenant worked up there with him. and one lieutenant worked at number 2 station. In 1948, the fire department established its own communication system. A telephone switchboard was installed at station number 1, and two-way radios were installed in the fire vehicles. And you can see the communications system there. That's the dispatcher, who is a firefighter, Francis McBroom. Now, in those days, when the emergency squad would go out on a call, they didn't have any communications with the hospital. So they would have to call in by radio to the dispatcher and tell him what they had, and he in turn would call the hospital on the telephone and tell them that they were coming. Before this communications system was put in there, all calls coming into that building came through the switchboard, which was manned by the police department. You can see the telephone on that wall. It's been there for years, I guess, by that door going to the upstairs. Even if you wanted to use that phone, you had to pick it up and it'd ring at the switchboard and you'd tell them you wanted an outside line. And all the fire calls came in at the police switchboard. They rang the bell at number 1 station. They rang the bell at number 2 station. However, number 2 station did have its own private phone line. And what was unique about it, the address of the station was 165 South Entrance. The telephone number was 160. So it came pretty close. Okay, and along the west wall, up there past the archway, there was buttons to open the overhead doors. There was one big lever that you could throw if the electricity was off, so it would release those doors. They could be opened by hand. And there was a box there that controlled the traffic lights. And the traffic lights were only from Indiana Avenue to East Avenue. So when the alarm would ring, the fire phone was up there on that wall. They would answer it and leave the station on a call. One man would always stay back. And he'd turn the red lights on for them, and when he figured they were through town, he'd switch them back. Or if they were going east, he'd wait till he saw number 2 go through and switch them back. On the off-duty shift, there was always one man on call. Now, he wasn't getting paid for this or anything, but he was on call. And any time that they had an alarm, the man that stayed back at the station would call this man on call to come in. He had to be near his telephone all day. And that way, that would give them 2 men to take the reserve truck if they got another fire call. Well, a lot of times before they even got there, they were on the way back. So they made a lot of dead runs there that didn't amount to anything. In 1958, the hours of the firefighters were lowered due to a new state law. They will now work 24 hours a day and 48 hours off duty, an average of 56 hours a week. In order to put this into work, they hired 5 new men. They hired them on December the 30th, 1957, which would allow them to have 3 shifts. In 1960, the newly constructed Southside Fire Station number 3 was opened at 200 West Water Street. And this is just a block west of where the old livery stable was down there. In 1961, the position of fire inspector was established. In 1965, the city received an international rescue truck from Civil Defense. In 1967, the West Kankakee area was annexed by the city, and the West Kankakee Fire Protection District was disbanded. Their fire equipment, which included 2 pumpers, an ambulance, and several hundred feet of 2.5-inch fire hose, was turned over to Kankakee. In 1969, the city and the firefighters reached an agreement for a 40-hour work week with 8-hour shifts. This was in effect for about 25 or 26 months, and it didn't work out for either party, so they went back to the 56-hour work week. In 1969, number 2 fire station at 165 South Entrance Avenue was closed, and the equipment was moved to the newly constructed East Side Fire Station number 4 at 100 North Fairmont Avenue. In 1970, the newly constructed West Side Fire Station number 5 was opened at 1765 West Station Street. In 1974, the training program intensified with classroom study along with practical training. In 1974, the Kankakee State Hospital was annexed by the city. Their pumper was turned over to Kankakee. In 1975, all new firefighters were required to attend and receive a certificate from a state fire school. In 1975, fire equipment was removed from fire station number 1, leaving only the shift commander's car, an ambulance, and the administrative personnel. In 1976, the newly constructed Northside Fire Station number 6 was opened at 885 North Washington Avenue. In 1985, the hours of firefighters were lowered due to a new federal law. They will now work an average of 53 hours a week instead of 56 hours. In 1986, I retired from the fire department. So now I'm going to retire from this presentation and turn it back over to Chief Young. Thank you.